Join me as we dive into the wildest moments from Week 5 fantasy football. From an insane wide receiver battle in Buccaneers versus Seahawks, a dropped touchdown run that could completely change who's trustworthy for the Cardinals, and 3 shining waiver wire ads you should consider for your team for Week 6. And Week 5 is pivotal for fantasy football. We now have enough data to know who we may be able to trust as we've seen NFL teams adapt over the course of the season. In this video, we're going to cover 24 different players who either stood out or flopped in Week 5, look at their trade value, their outlook for the rest of the season, and those 3 waiver ads I talked about at the beginning. Now, we have to start with this insane battle between Jackson Smith-Njigba and Emeka Egbuka, but not for the reason you might think, because both these players, you know they absolutely crush, and obviously they're both starts for fantasy football. But there's a secret advantage that we're going to keep using for the rest of the season, because in some of the videos we posted this week, we highlight specific cornerback and wide receiver matchups. For example, Devin Witherspoon of the Seahawks was out for this game, giving Emeka Egbuka a special advantage facing weaker cornerbacks. The same was true for Jackson Smith-Njigba. He had one of the best cornerback matchups of the entire week, and both players absolutely popped off because of it. Moving forward, I'm going to be updating you guys every single week with the best possible cornerback wide receiver matchups, because that's a huge advantage for your team. Make sure you're subscribed. Next player we have to cover is Rico Dowdle, who was an insane surprise Week 5. Over 200 rushing yards and a touchdown. Rico Dowdle will be a part of this offense moving forward. Now, the one thing to watch out for is that Chuba Hubbard will be back at some point, where Rico Dowdle will lose a lot of his value. So if he's an extra player for you, you don't really need him on your team, look to trade him away and capitalize on this huge game. Lock in some value for your team, because he's probably not going to be a super startable player the whole season with Chuba Hubbard returning. Jamar Chase is another player I'd like to sell high after this huge week. We look at his reception totals. He had 14 in Week 2, but then 5, then 5, then 6. And that 6 this week turned into 2 touchdowns and some huge plays. But most week, those 6 receptions are going to turn into 7, 8, 9, 10 fantasy points, not the 30 points that he had this week. Another one of the biggest surprise of the week was CJ Stroud dropping 28 points on the Ravens. Now, the first takeaway before I get into the Texans team is this Ravens defense. If you have players playing against the Ravens, you have to put them in your starting line. They are very injured. They're giving up so many fantasy points. But also the Texans, don't want to take away from them. They looked great. But before we get into them, I have to hand up, guys. I was wrong about Woody Marks, and I apologize if you started him. I did start him in 2 of my leagues where I was able to get him, so I was wrong about that one. It seems like this Chubb versus Woody Marks is going to be a kind of a fantasy football nightmare, but CJ Stroud and the receivers looked amazing. They really figured out what they're doing. Remember, they lost Stephon Diggs and they lost Tank Dell at the end of last season. It seems like the last 2 weeks, they've started to figure that out. And with their schedule, I do think there's good opportunity for these wide receivers to make a big impact for the season. So look for them on the waiver wire. Now, they're not part of the 3 guys I think are must-adds, but if they are available, they'll be extremely cheap since the Texans are on bye this week. Bill Croskey-Merritt. Welcome back to Jaden Daniels, by the way. He crushed in this game. Deebo Samuel crushed in this game. That was one of our good calls of the week. Bill Croskey-Merritt, he looks back and amazing with Jaden Daniels at quarterback. With Jaden Daniels, the defense really doesn't know what to do. They don't know where to look, and Bill Croskey-Merritt took advantage in this game. And as a rookie, it looks like he's growing. Now, I don't know if we can fully trust him each and every week, because this has been a little bit of a ride the hot hand, a little bit of a committee, but it looks like he finally may be breaking out to be that fantasy football starter that we dreamed he would be at the start of the season. Jalen Waddle also crushed in his game. Darren Waller as well. That was another good call from us last week. So again, make sure you're subscribed. Now, Jalen Waddle popped off as well. It looks like both these guys are very startable moving forward. That's great news for Waddle. With Tyreek Hill in the lineup, Waddle was almost unstartable. He did have some bad games, but without Tyreek Hill, he had 9, 10 targets, somewhere in that range. That's going to be very startable week in and week out. And Darren Waller looks like one of the steals of the year off the waiver wire. Again, making a huge impact for the Dolphins. More with the late tight end propaganda. Theo Johnson, someone we talked about this week as a good ad, had 2 touchdowns. Now, is he going to have 2 touchdowns every week? No, he's absolutely not, but he does look like a solid red zone target for the Giants, for Jackson Dart, and someone I would add off waivers. He's not one of our 3 main ads, but someone I would add off waivers if he's available and you're hurting at tight end. He looks like that reliable safety blanket in the red zone that could get you a touchdown, any given week. Now, we have to talk the Eagles. A.J. Brown complained all week long, so one of the surprises of this week is that he still got his targets, but he didn't even have that great of a fantasy football week. Devonta Smith stepped up and had an insane game. And Saquon Barkley had an extremely weird game. Now, he did score good fantasy points for us, thankfully, but he only had 6 carries in this game. Can you believe that? 18, 22, 18, 19, then 6 carries in this game. I am worried about Saquon Barkley moving forward if they are going to focus on this pass, but this was also the only game they've lost so far this season. A.J. Brown, he got his targets. It didn't work. Next week, they go back to the ground game. At least I hope so. A.J. Brown is almost someone we have to bench at this point. Everybody else on the Eagles, Dallas Goedert, Jalen Hurts, Devonta Smith, even Saquon Barkley, of course, are startable. But A.J. Brown has been actively hurting our teams each and every week. So if you drafted him, I'm sorry, but I think we want to leave him on the bench till he has his next big game, then try to trade him away. Another huge surprise from week 5 was Derrick Henry. He had 15 carries and 33 yards. He simply hasn't been good this season since week 1. Thankfully, he got that red zone touchdown, got the ball on the 1, and scored a touchdown, saved the week. But this is a player I honestly would be looking to trade away. Now, we look at his schedule. They do have a few tough games, but they have a lot of easy games as well. Maybe it gets better. They get Lamar Jackson back. They get clicking. He starts scoring a lot of touchdowns. But I think if you can sell high on the name value alone, I would, because so far he's been extremely inefficient after week 1. Another huge surprise of this week, a positive surprise, was David Njoku. With Dylan Gabriel taking over at quarterback, it didn't help everybody. Jerry Jeudy still had a bad week, but David Njoku had 9 targets, 6 receptions, 67 yards, and a touchdown for a huge week. So I don't know if I'm going to completely trust him moving forward, because he hasn't been that great for the whole season. But with 9 targets, that is the type of tight end volume we love to see. So David Njoku, he goes in the lineup against Pittsburgh next week. And tighten up, baby! This was an absolutely insane game for the Titans to pull out the win. If you guys did not know, I live in Nashville, so I got to root for this home team. Very exciting win for the Titans today, but it was more of an excruciating loss for the Cardinals. Now, Michael Carter looked good. He scored 18 fantasy points, had a touchdown, 51 yards, and 5 receptions. This is a guy you can trust moving forward, because DeMercado had a 72-yard rushing touchdown in his hands, and he dropped it at the goal line for a touchback, which the Titans then came back in a huge upset fashion to kick a last-second game-winning field goal based on a few other mistakes by the Cardinals, including an interception that Cam Ward threw, fumbled by the defense into the end zone that Tyler Lockett of the Titans recovered. An insane win for the Titans. But for fantasy football purposes, Michael Carter, hopefully that's the guy you added this week. It was really a toss-up, so I don't blame you if you missed that one. Nobody really knew. But with that fumble by DeMercado, it looks like Michael Carter is going to be the guy going forward. Plus, he had a solid game, so I would lock him into lineups next week. And maybe my receiver of the week, Ashton Jeanty, with 5 receptions in this game. Now, he's someone I said you need to sell high after last week. He scored 33 points. But if he's going to get 5 receptions every game, because without him, he only scored 10 fantasy points, that's not very good. But with 5 receptions, that's going to keep him as a top-tier fantasy option each and every week. So Jeanty does look like someone you may be able to trust going forward if they keep him involved in the receiving game. Welcome back to lad McConkey. Finally had that touchdown, finally that red zone target that paid off, and unfortunately he was probably on our bench. If we look at the numbers, they really weren't that impressive. 5 receptions for 40 yards. That's not going to be good enough most weeks. I think Lad is actually someone that I may try to sell high at this point. Now, this is your opportunity. I'm not selling for peanuts, not selling for nothing. I'm selling to someone who thinks he's officially back, because these numbers aren't the numbers of someone who's officially back. And if you look at the offensive line, Herbert is under major pressure due to all the injuries. I'd be honestly looking to sell high a little bit, because the yardage and the targets and the receptions, that didn't really change that much. He just added 6 extra points with the touchdown. Now it's time for the 3 shining waiver wire ads after week 5. And if you want this video every single week, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And our first ad is Mason Taylor. He's someone we've been talking about because he's been growing throughout the season with 1 reception week 1, 1 reception week 2, 4, 5, then 9 receptions this week on 12 targets. He's turning into an absolute safety net for this Jets offense. Now, he did well with Tyrod Taylor. Now he's doing amazing with Justin Fields as well. Someone you can trust. He's available in 79% of leagues, meaning 4 out of 5 you need to spend pretty much all of your remaining fab if you're hurting at tight end to get Mason Taylor for your team. Now, AJ Barner, he's not Mason Taylor, but he's a solid ad, available in 97% of leagues, so much more readily available. He had 2 touchdowns in this game on 7 receptions. He's a player that looks like a viable red zone target for the Seahawks team. All the attention's going to the running backs, to Jackson Smith-Njigba, and A.J. Barner is starting to step up. This is someone I would add for cheaper, not a lot of fab here, but someone that could look to continue his breakout next week against the Jaguars. Now, Isaiah Bond is the secret waiver ad of the week because he didn't have the best week, but he had 7 targets. That was some of the most on the team. He was getting targets on the 3rd down, on the 4th down. He was getting deep targets down the field, and if they can start connecting, he's going to break out for fantasy football. If you have a good roster, he is highly available in many leagues. I would add him as a stash for your bench for someone that could be relevant in the fantasy football playoffs. What was your fantasy football experience in week 5? Did you win your matchup? Did you have something crazy happen? Let me know in the comments, and hit that subscribe button to get all the insights you need to dominate in week 6.